Hey ladies and gentlemen, Steven here from Redolessence and welcome back to another video. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope this video finds you well, and in today's episode, I'm really excited to be going over my thoughts of whether or not I consider Versace Eros Eau De Toilette to be a good purchase for the year 2020. If you're excited to hear my thoughts, make sure to stay tuned. Now, before I begin this video and I tell you if I think Versace Eros Eau De Toilette is still worth it in 2020, I do want to encourage you to please consider supporting this channel by subscribing to it. If you are a fan of fragrance related content, whether you like videos like these, fragrance reviews, top 10 videos, pretty much any sort of fragrance related videos, please hit that red subscribe button in the corner to support. And of course, while you're at it, please be sure to enable notifications by clicking on the bell. So I'm sure a lot of people here know that Versace Eros Eau De Toilette is a fragrance that has really taken over the designer scene. It has become a very successful fragrance over the course of the past 8 years. It actually came out back in 2012. I know nowadays we also have the Eau de Parfum version, which just came out this year in 2020. And of course, we also have Versace Eros Flame, which is in a red bottle, has a bit more of a brighter feel in my opinion. And it is a little bit different as far as the smell is concerned. So in order to assess this fragrance and whether or not I feel it's still worth it in 2020, I did want to consider a few different metrics. So first up, the uniqueness, right? How unique do I find this fragrance to be, especially when compared to other fragrances with a similar olfactory profile? Also, any alternatives that could possibly be on the market. Maybe there is a similarly priced or a more inexpensively priced fragrance on the market that I would recommend or suggest that you go out and purchase instead of this fragrance. Of course, you also have any possible reformulations that this fragrance may have incurred. You have the price. Has it been discounted over the course of the past few years? How steep are those discounts? I did the research for you. And then last up, the modernity. Is it still relevant in 2020? In other words, is it a fragrance where maybe there have been some better fragrances released over the course of the past few years that I would suggest that you wear instead of this? Not necessarily alternatives, but fragrances that I feel are an improvement on this genre. So let's go ahead and start with the uniqueness. Now, when this fragrance came out in 2012, I never personally found it to be too unique. I always thought that this fragrance had its own identity, its own character. When I smell it in the air, if somebody's wearing it around me, I know they're wearing Versace Eros versus another fragrance that could perhaps be a little bit similar as far as it falling under that same genre or whatever. But I always knew of other tonka bean heavy fragrances, one of them being Man Au Buisson Intense. I believe I'm referring to the correct one, if that is indeed the one that came out before 2012. There was also Mandarina Duck Pure Black, and of course tonka bean is a note that many fragrances have been rife with in the designer industry. So of course Versace Eros is no pioneer in that genre, but the way that it was able to utilize the tonka bean, the vanilla, and the mint was pretty impressive, I would say. And I found that it did utilize a combination that hadn't been done before. So as far as the uniqueness is concerned, I actually did find this to be a unique fragrance, only to a certain extent. I just feel like a lot of those elements of which this fragrance was inclusive have been used before. And so like I said, while the uniqueness in the sense of me being able to identify Eros for what it's worth, that was there, but I found that it also did utilize a lot of other ingredients that were also found in other fragrances. So I never really considered this one to be totally unique. Now, getting into alternatives, there are a lot of alternatives on the market. We have one by English Laundry called Oxford Blue, which I also own. It's much more inexpensive than Versace Eros. It could be found online discounted as well. I remember seeing it at Macy's a long time ago. And so it is a brand that has gained popularity over the course of the past few years. Of course, there's also a fragrance by the Brazilian company Natura, and I forget the name of it, but it was like a 2-word name in a red bottle, if I'm not mistaken. And that one is said to be similar to Versace Eros as well. I know Dossier is another company that has put out their own version of Versace Eros. I've smelled that and I do find it to be quite close to Versace Eros, probably without the use of some captive ingredients that are only accessible to Versace as a company. And so I do find that there are some alternatives on the market, and they are going to be found at a significantly less expensive price. And so if somebody is really a fan of Versace Eros Eau De Toilette and maybe they don't have the money to be able to afford this at a discounted price, I remember looking at fragrancex.com and they had a 3.4 ounce tester for about $52 American, which is really not a whole lot of money for an authentic Versace fragrance, albeit one that's a little bit of an older stock, but I don't think it's a whole lot of money to burn through. However, if $52 for a tester of a 100 ml is too much, I do find that a lot of these other more affordably variants might be a little bit more accessible to you. So as far as price is concerned, I do think that that's something that works in the favor of this fragrance, just because a lot of other fragrances that I might prefer over this fragrance happen to be a little bit more expensive, and that would include the Eros Flame variant and also the EDP, which just came out. So you're not really gonna have an easy time finding that one discounted online, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So in terms of alternatives, there are a whole lot of alternatives, and there have been a lot of other designer expressions that utilize that tonka bean note. Of course, Invictus has done its own thing with it, and I'm not going to go through the list because there are just way too many designer fragrances to name. But the next category is reformulation. Now, I am working off of a 2012 batch. I actually bought this fragrance right when it came out, I believe in the very first month of its release. So I would reckon that I have a vintage bottle here with me. Ever since the release of the fragrance, I have heard a lot about reformulations. A lot of my subscribers who leave comments on my channel, but also just close friends that I've had conversations with, would often bring up the fact that a lot of designer fragrances have been subjected to the fate of reformulations, and this happens to be one that gets brought up in conversations quite often. And so the first thing that people comment on is the lack of performance. They'll say that with the original they had really good performance. However, with this one, it feels like it's not lasting on their skin as long as it once used to. And so I don't know if that's necessarily on account of the substitution of certain ingredients to cut costs, or maybe that's because of a dilution in the formula. Maybe it's just not lasting as long because the concentration has been weakened. But nevertheless, while I cannot necessarily confirm for myself because I still have liquid left in my 2012 bottle, I cannot confirm for myself that there has been a reformulation. It is sort of the word on the town, the word on the street, so to speak. So a lot of people have been talking about reformulations. So for that reason, it might actually be to your benefit to go for something like the Eau de Parfum version instead of this one, or maybe even the Eros Flame version, which I also get really good performance from. And being as though that's a more recent release, it's less likely to have suffered the fate of the reformulation that this one may possibly has suffered. So the next category is the price of the fragrance. I know we commented a little bit on that earlier on in this video. Now, the retail price for this one, if I'm not mistaken, is in the $80 range, and we're talking about the 100 ml size. Now, the Eau de Parfum, which in my opinion, the smell of the Eau de Parfum is about 85 to 90% similar to this one. The Eau de Parfum retails for about $102. So it is going to be a little bit more expensive than the retail price of the Eau de Toilette. However, the cheapest I found was like $30 for like the 30 ml size. So it can be found for a pretty good discount online. I know sometimes you might see some deals that are a little too good to be true. Don't fall for it. I actually also did a real versus fake of Versace Eros Eau De Toilette. I'm going to leave a link to that up here. Actually, it was the Eros Flame, but I know for a fact that the Eros Eau De Toilette has been counterfeited as well. So if you do see a deal online that's a little bit too good to be true, don't fall for it, because it might actually just end up being a counterfeit. But nevertheless, there are some really good deals floating around online for Versace Eros Eau De Toilette. So there are some $30 range, $40 range deals. And so just make sure that you double check the status of the seller, make sure that he or she has really good ratings, but I digress. So I do find that this one is probably going to give you a really good price online. However, if you do take into consideration the reformulations, you might actually be better off spending a little bit of extra money on the Eau de Parfum, especially when a lot of companies like Macy's and Nordstrom, I actually checked as of today, and yeah, they're running a 15% off promotion. So what retails for $102 is actually selling for about $86 at the moment. So for something like that, when you take into consideration the 2 or 3 extra hours of longevity that the Eau de Parfum is going to give you over the Eau de Toilette, I actually would say that it might be worth getting the Eau de Parfum. And also a lot of people might actually prefer that sort of added cedarwood, vetiver, leathery nuance going on in the base. They might consider that to be an improvement over this fragrance, considering that one to be a little bit more mature or sophisticated, as opposed to this fragrance, which might come off smelling a little bit youthful or immature on account of that bubblegum note. I personally don't find it to be immature. Youthful, yes, it's a good clubbing fragrance, but people have different preferences when it comes to what kind of fragrances they would enjoy. And that brings us to the last category, which is the modernity. Does this still smell modern? Does it smell reflective of the decade in which it was released? And of course, this is not even a full decade old, but there have been several variants released since 2012 when this came out. And I'm just going to be honest with you, I personally prefer the Eau de Parfum version. I also prefer Versace Eros Flame. And when it comes to a lot of tonka bean based fragrances, yes, this is one of my favorites, but I feel like even under the umbrella of Versace, they have released some fragrances that I would much prefer to wear over this fragrance, unless we're talking about some really high tier tonka bean fragrances like Fève Délicieuse by Christian Dior or something like that. But then we're talking about a completely different price range, and one that's actually much, much higher than this fragrance. And so we're not going to get into that territory, but I actually do prefer the Eau de Parfum and Versace Eros Flame over the 2012 EDT. And that brings us to the final verdict. Do I think that Versace Eros Eau de Toilette is still worth it in 2020? My answer is going to be no. And it's going to be no for a few different reasons. One, the reformulations. People are really bummed out because they are familiar with the 2012 vintage batch, and a lot of the newer batches are not getting them that same performance. The second reason why is because there have been several flankers released that have ended up being a lot better. Of course, the price is working in the favor of this fragrance, and I do think it still smells modern. I still think it smells youthful and contemporary, and of course you can still pull this off in 2020. But I feel like my final verdict is a little conditional, in the sense that in another 6 months, when the Eau de Parfum gets discounted, this is going to be a no-brainer. I would 100% recommend picking up the Eau de Parfum over the Eau de Toilette, unless of course for some reason you have a really fond attachment to the smell of the Eau de Toilette. Maybe it conjures up certain memories that the Eau de Parfum doesn't. If you're in that small percentage of people that it can very quickly pick up on the differences between the two, then I would recommend going for the Eau de Toilette. But my personal preference, I would say the Eau de Parfum is the better bet for you. And even then, also make sure to take the time and go ahead and check out the Versace Eros Flame variant, which I also consider to be quite good as well. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching. This was my video on whether or not I think Versace Eros Eau de Toilette is still worth it in 2020. And of course, this is the 2012 release. Obviously, if you are new to this channel and you took something of value from this video, if you enjoyed this video or you found it helpful or informative in any way, I would really appreciate it if you could support this channel by subscribing to it. All you have to do is click on that red button in the corner. And of course, while you're at it, also please be sure to enable notifications by clicking on the bell. This way, whenever I do publish these videos, they will get delivered straight to your feed. You never need to worry about missing any of my future content. Thanks again for watching. I love you all. We'll see you next time. Bye.